Welcome to Old Testament History, Chapter 3, Session 8, The Two Laws, the Two Mountains, and the Two Lawgivers, Part 2. Moses, the lawgiver, gave the law of Moses from a mountaintop. Jesus, the lawgiver, spoke from a mountaintop too. First, he spoke from a smaller mount with his Sermon on the Mount, but he also has spoken from a greater mountain, from the right hand of God upon the mountain of God in the sides of the north. In the Gospel of Matthew, when he spoke from the first mountain, he had not yet fulfilled the law of Moses. But when he spoke from the second mountain, everything to come was a foregone conclusion. In part 1 of the two laws, the two mountains, and the two lawgivers, we've seen that when the prophecies of Jeremiah 31 came to pass, that they are partially fulfilled now. But when they fully come to pass, the law of Moses will become largely obsolete, for it regulates physical human beings, not angels. Hence, a new law, obviously, will have to be given for us as angels. And though we are partly spiritual beings now, so there are some things that begin to apply even now. Does the word speak of this new law in a present tense way? Yes, we read about that in Romans 8. But Jesus also had a lot to say about the old law. You see, Jesus, being the Messiah, fulfilling the law, was the epitome of a law keeper as well. He knew more about the Torah than all the rabbis who ever lived, and he knew it accurately. The Sadducees and Pharisees had warped the law and even added to it, like I mentioned in last week's session. So in fulfilling the law, Jesus actually put the law back into its proper perspective. As the Messiah, he lived it and taught it in its greatest embodiment. We Christians look at the Gospels as the seed of Christianity, and they were, but also they were the zenith of Judaism. And Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, gave the world the greatest discourse on the law since Moses. When I did my initial work on the Sermon on the Mount, my bucket got filled to the brim several times. It was a wonderful experience, witnessing the profound genius of Jesus and realizing some of the gems which he communicated. And I experienced that filling many times, prompting me to rush over to my keyboard to capture its essence before it faded. Then, as I processed the information and corroborated it with other truths known, and also gave it forth, teaching it to you seekers and wanderers, more room was made in my bucket to receive more. So after I had written my first volumes on that sermon, I anticipated that even though I had seen many gems and beauties, there probably would be more to learn. And one of the areas of most import probably would be the ramifications of how the Sermon on the Mount summed up the themes of the Old Testament. Now I have learned much more, and I could write another volume on the Sermon on the Mount. Oh, whoa, Nellie, I have enough projects. Lord help me. But I would like to think that that's the reason my life has been prolonged. God's law was not evil. It was not abusive. What the Pharisees and legalists did too, it was. Anything of God is inherently profound and beautiful and intricate and perfect. And there are genuine scholars of God who have dedicated their lives to understanding his laws, because they're a reflection of God's holiness, his compassion, and his mercy. And I'm sure they have extolled his beauties as well. I usually try to teach things from 10,000 feet up, showing how stuff fits into the big picture. Then I fit more detailed teachings into that overall picture. But in this series on the Old Testament, I've gotten into a lot more detail. But some people who are new to Tune In Tuesday and YouTube in the playbacks have been questioning why this class is necessary, because we are in a different era, a different administration. Well, that's okay. I don't mind their questions. I suspect they have not listened to the teaching on the 7 ones, which squarely resides in the church administration, and some of my other teachings that are within our church administration. Yes, this stuff in the Old Testament is for our learning, and my ministry is largely directed towards the beauties and intricacies of the great mystery and the one body and the role of Jesus Christ as the right hand of God. But we won't know those things in all their beauty until we see the symmetries with the Old Testament. And so that's why we're here. Also, another focus of my ministry is on hermeneutics, how the Word explains and interprets itself. I'm a researcher, and I teach folks how to research. So I'm sharing that simultaneously with the Old Testament record. In part 1 of this teaching, we've seen how Jesus fulfilled the law. He lived it for us, on our behalf, just like we were identified with him in his circumcision, death, resurrection, ascension, and being seated at God's right hand. Well, in the same way, he did the law for us. He fulfilled it. We all believe that Jesus died for our sins, right? Well, did he miss any? No. Jesus died for all of our sin. Big ones, little ones, fat ones, skinny ones, habitual ones too. He saves to the uttermost. You ever hear that? All of them. So that's why Romans 8:1 declares that there is therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. Period. The rest of that verse in Romans 8:1 is not in the text. And if you get out your interlinear, you'll see the note that says GLTTRAW. That's all the textual scholars that made the critical texts: Griesbach, Lockman, Tischendorf, Tregelles, Alford, Wordsworth, and then Nestle and the UBS text also. It's not in the text. Some monkeyed with the text and added, who walk not after the flesh but after the Spirit, to Romans 8:1. They did that because they thought it was too good to be true. It didn't fit with their condemnation model for Christianity. So they felt compelled to add that phrase. Well, you know the drill. We're sinners. God hates sin. You better get saved before you burn, etc. You see, if those people can keep us under their sin consciousness, they can keep us under their control and listening to them and keep their organizations going. But they just can't fathom how great grace is. That's because they're so fixated on sin, they can't conceive of the real reason for our freedom in Christ. So they can't tolerate the idea of people sinning again after they've been forgiven and, quote unquote, getting away with it. Well, is that what really happens? Well, yeah, some folks try to do that. They sin and ask for forgiveness, and then they sin again, and they ask for forgiveness again, and they sin again, and the cycle goes on. The same sin. Some folks do that, either afraid to confront their error, or not thinking they can beat it, or giving up because they think they're trapped in it, or a host of other illusions. Legalists can't get that perspective of grace out of their mind. But that is not what grace is for. Those who abuse grace will be affected. Just read Romans 6 and 7 over and over and over till you get it. We don't have grace, so we can keep on sinning. The reason for grace is so we can serve. We're not to be so sin conscious and beat down and focused on our unworthiness so much that all we think about is what we should not do. We're freed from sin so we can walk for God and do the spectacular things that He's called us to do. We're supposed to concentrate on what we should do, not on the negative, what we should not do. And for every one of us who has found that divine calling and is walking for God that way, there comes a time when we see that the sin which doth so easily beset us, yeah, that one, that weakness that seems so hard to beat, yeah, that one, that the legalists browbeat us over, yeah, that one, that was the one which was holding us back from really walking for God the way we saw we could. And for many of those folks, the time came when we mustered the commitment to beat that sin, to conquer that weakness and not fail anymore, so we could walk for God unencumbered. And God came through in a big way and delivered us. And we did that because we wanted to, not because we were forced to. We did that out of pure love for God, not fear of hellfire. And you know what we did when we did that? We fulfilled the righteousness of the law because we walked not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. Well, woo-hoo! Romans 8:4. Well, do you want that in your life? Do you want to love God that big? Do you want your life to change? Then just get busy helping in your church, doing what you can, and God will guide you into your holy calling, your reasons for existence. And if you can't do that in your church, well, find one where you fit. Folks have done this and joyfully reported back. It works. And when you realize what your calling is and do it, there's nothing greater in the whole world. And that's what my ministry is all about. I teach people how to get there. And I'll even help those other organizations teach their people how to get there too. Hallelujah, sock it to you. So, now that the subject of Jesus, a lawgiver, has opened up to me, and knowing the genius of Jesus, I expect to learn more things. So, this has been a real treat to see them. So, what did Jesus really say and mean in Matthew 5? Let's take a look. He made a whale of a transition statement into the third section of the Sermon on the Mount. This is what he said in Matthew 5. Think not that I'm come to destroy the law and the prophets. I'm not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say to you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore shall break one of the least of these commandments and teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say to you, except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, you shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. Oh, wow. He had just gotten their attention and proven that he was the Messiah by giving them the Beatitudes. In that, he told them more about the kingdom of heaven in 90 seconds when he spoke the Beatitudes than anyone anywhere ever had spoken. Those who were attentive and knowledgeable of that style of teaching and speech, understanding all the figures of speech that were involved, they were stunned, and they were staring at him with their mouths wide open. They were realizing that he must be the Messiah. I cover all that beauty of the Beatitudes, most profound words ever spoken, in my book, Volume 1, on the Sermon on the Mount, Reversing Religious Repression. Jesus structured that sermon in several alternating sections between Caruso preaching and Evangelo evangelizing. He had flowery sections full of repetitions and figures of speech, alternating with sections of rousing encouragement like, you are the salt of the earth. Well, be the salt. Stand up. Preserve, protect, purify, like salt does. You are the light of the world. Well, shine. Shine like only you can. Be thou perfect, as our Heavenly Father is perfect. Don't listen to the detractors. You can do that. Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. Wow, those are all His clarion calls to action. And then in between those were His profound, multi-layered, gem-like discourses. So here He is in Matthew 5, right after He establishes His authority as the Messiah. And He didn't do it by claiming, I am the Messiah. You better listen to me. No, they would have laughed Him to scorn. Instead, He proved He was the Messiah by the sheer weight of the Beatitudes, which are the most profound and beautiful words ever spoken. Well, you want to see that? All right, I'll show you. John the Baptist had said, the Messiah is here now, but had not publicly told everyone who it was. So all of Judea was abuzz. Who is it? Nah, it can't be. Oh, it must be. Wouldn't that be wonderful if it is? Who is it? Who is it? Then this Jesus of Nazareth fella, who hardly anyone had heard teach, announces this big meeting in a natural amphitheater north of Tiberias by the Sea of Galilee. It's the starting gun for the great race which will determine the fate of eternity. And there He stood before the beautiful backdrop of the sea, facing a crowd of critics, seekers, and wanderers at the turning point of a world in crisis. The Roman soldiers on patrol, they just languished in the warm sun. They didn't know or care who He was. And the people hoped who He might be, but were unsure. But the adversaries' emissaries sent on a recon mission, who did know, clenched their fists. How would He prove to them who He was? How could He convince them to follow Him? With these words. Matthew chapter 5, verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you, when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. Wow. Blessed are they, blessed are they, blessed are they. Those guys. It built in a crescendo, but then it changed. Blessed are you. That change focused the impact of the crescendo on them and made it personal. And then Jesus dared to ask them to be reviled, to take persecution, and to endure evil for His sake. How could He do that? How could He think He could ask them to do that, to take sides with Him that quickly? How could He ask for such a commitment after only speaking to them for 90 seconds? Well, they knew why. for they were used to hearing the best public speakers of their time, like we with Winston Churchill or Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who spiced their speeches with figures of speech. And here was Jesus, who towered above all the rest. Even his opponents said, "No man has spoken like this man." So he captured their attention when he used that repetition, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, with the first beatitude and the 8th one. Most Christians are ignorant of the role of repetitions in the Bible, but it's full of them. 2 weeks ago, we saw the import of a repetition in John 3. This one here is a different kind. This repetition frames a section as a paragraph marker, summarizing the contents in between, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So Jesus, by using it, was signaling, think of the Beatitudes in terms of their function in the kingdom of heaven. Well, boom, every one of these is fulfilled in the millennial kingdom, the kingdom of heaven that they all were yearning for. And when he did that, light bulbs were going off in the crowd. They were realizing, here is someone who just told us more about the kingdom of heaven than we'd ever heard. This Jesus of Nazareth must be the one that John spoke of, the Messiah. Wow. That's how he got his authority. That's how he could boldly claim his messianic authority. What did Jesus do next then? He gave a masterful dissertation on the law with litigations, just like we covered in Exodus 21. And when he did this, he spoke about the law via one of the Caruso sections that were full of figures of speech. So here again is his transition statement, which left them breathless, ears burning, staring at him with their mouths wide open. Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am come not to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say to you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say to you, that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, you shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. And they stood there, staring at him. What? How? What? How? How is that going to happen? How could we exceed the Pharisees? The Pharisees were already observing the law to an excruciating degree. Remember, there were over 600 individual acts a day that were expected of them. That's impossible. And they'd even added stuff like fences around the law to try to ensure that it wouldn't even be broken. For like Eve said, don't even touch the fruit. You know, my name is D'Antonio. I sell the fruit. If you must squeeze the fruit, no, squeeze the banana, squeeze the coconut. That's from Dale Carnegie. Eve added a prohibition for extra protection in a similar fashion to the Pharisees. Now, back in Matthew 5, Jesus is about to explain and summarize the law in the next 6 examples. He would explain how their righteousness could exceed that of the Pharisees, and they could qualify for the kingdom of heaven, and they were hanging on his every word. This third section of the sermon utilizes another kind of phrase repetition, the figure of speech called amoebaon, Amoebaeon, or refrain. And that is, you've heard it's been said, but I say to you. You've heard it's been said, but I say to you. There's 6 of them. These are dividers into sections. These sections, then, are a list of examples, his litigations. And when Jesus gave lists, they were exquisitely thought through to the nth degree. They were stunning and beautiful, and each of his examples were delivered in this characteristic way, and also in Semitic fashion, utilizing Semitic hyperbole, stating each in the light of its most extreme application. The logic in the Semitic mind is that if it applies in the extreme, then it will apply in all lesser cases. That's Semitic hyperbole. So, this is concerning the law, right? So the rabbis usually catalog the law into 3 categories: moral law, ceremonial law, and civil law. There's other ways of cataloging. Positive and negative commandments is another. What to do, what not to do. Another way of looking at the law of Moses is casuistic or case law, which concerns a conditional statement and then a type of punishment to be meted out. So if this, then that. And then the other part is apodictic law, that is, regulations in the form of divine commands. But what I think Jesus did here in the Sermon on the Mount was to catalog the law of Moses into 6 divisions. Why did I think so? Because I understand his style, having studied his 4 major sermons in depth. The Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7. The Sermon on the Plain, Luke 6. That's given at a different time at the apostles' ordination. The 3rd sermon is what I call the Sermon in the Valley, John 13 through 17. But there is one more sermon of Jesus, which I call the Sermon from Heaven, Revelation 1 through 3. And I bet there's going to be a 5th one right after the gathering together, and a 6th one inaugurating the millennial kingdom, and a 7th one at the beginning of the new heaven and earth, all defining the new criteria for each coming age. I think I know whereof I affirm. And you heard it here on Tune In Tuesday. But for now, all 4 sermons that have been spoken bear the same characteristics of Jesus' beautiful, flowery, profound, multifaceted, layered, thought through to the nth degree speech. They were lists of beauty. There are at least 7 layers to the Beatitudes and 7 layers to the Lord's Prayer. Those were his doctrine, which is Sermon on the Plain then echoes from the practical standpoint. And then there are the 7 facets of because I go to my Father in the Sermon in the Valley, which fit with Jesus's 7 titles in the Pentateuch. And then in the Sermon from Heaven, there are 4 ways of looking at the 7 churches in Revelation 2 and 3. And on top of that are layered Jesus revealing his 7 right-hand man job descriptions, which also fit with his 7 titles in the Pentateuch. Wow, that took me years to realize, and you just got it all at once. Bam! So I think that true to form, like he did in the Lord's Prayer, where he simultaneously gave his 7 categories of prayer while giving examples of each, I think similarly he is doing the same with his doctoral thesis on the 6 categories of the law, and simultaneously giving examples of each. And then on top of that, he is building toward a climax that will amaze them all. This is another example of the genius of Jesus. No man has spoken like this man. Okay, now, why 6 categories and not 7? Everything else I presented is in 7s. Well, the law of Moses deals with man, and 6 is man's number. Might a 7th be the perfect law of the Spirit that was yet to come? These divisions are set off by the repetition, "You've heard it's been said, but I say to you." Well, who had said it before Jesus? The scribes and the teachers of the law. So here, Jesus is already claiming to supersede them. You see that? Wow, he is greater than all the rabbis that contributed to the Talmud, to all the prior dissertations of the Torah. Now some folks pronounce it Torah, and other folks pronounce it Torah. Well, some say tomato, and some say tomato, and some say potato, and some say potato. So you need to put the emphasis on the right syllable, okay? So if we're speaking Hebrew, we would say Torah. Strong's number 8451. But I am speaking English, and so I pronounce it Torah. But y'all know what I mean, okay? And Jesus probably was delivering this sermon in Aramaic anyway, and not in Hebrew. So, now with this newly claimed authority that he claimed by speaking the Beatitudes, he is about to add his nuances to the law. Why? Because he is a lawgiver. So let's try to perceive what he's doing here. The first section in Matthew 5 deals with "thou shalt not murder." Now, that's the word in Aramaic. It's murder. This is regarding moral law. Thou shalt not murder. That's the greatest one of these. Now, I know no sin is greater than any other sin to God. They're all sin. But to us men, murdering is greater than lying or coveting or stealing, all right? So if these principles apply for murdering in this first section, then they will apply for all the rest of the moral law. This is that Semitic hyperbole. So look at Matthew 5:21. Matthew 5:21. You've heard it was said by them of old time, "Thou shalt not kill," it's murder. "And whosoever shall murder shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say unto you, that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Racha, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever shall say, Thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire." Ooh. Well, we must understand this in its own time, not by today's culture. Jesus, true to his form, is giving us a clue in this first example, which will function to decipher the rest of his examples. This dissertation is about the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. So the letter of the law is, "Do not murder." The spirit of the law in this first example is, if that is so, then we ought not to kill each other with our words. The Pharisees who had warped the law, those from whom Jesus said they had heard from before, they were angry with their brothers without a cause, because they were just accusing them of breaking their rules. But their spurious rules were beyond the law, on top of it, added to it. And so Jesus declared they were angry without a cause. Oh, that was a shot over their bow. Jesus was not holding back a bit. They were in danger of the judgment. But then he went further. Rakha is an Aramaic word which comes from the word spit. All right? Now, see, I told you, he was delivering his sermon in Aramaic, not Hebrew. This was a very derogatory term. The Pharisees were condemning their brothers and sisters, saying, "You ain't worth spit. You can't walk for God. You're so bad. You're so wrong. You're so mistaken. But we're perfect Pharisees." And then Jesus went even further and said to the Pharisees that they were calling their brothers fools. Now, that does not communicate the same today, because we call people fools all the time. But back then, in that God-centered culture, calling someone a fool was one of the worst things you could do, for in so doing, you implied that the God that they followed was a fool too. Wow. But what Jesus is doing here, he is setting up the rest of his dissertation, because what applies here will be the clues to everything else. All right? It was going to be regarding the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, because the Pharisees excruciatingly abode by the letter of the law, but they flagrantly violated its spirit. Upholding the spirit of the law would be how one's righteousness could exceed that of the Pharisees. So, if that was the case, with the greatest of moral law, thou shalt not murder, it implied that it covered and worked for all the rest of the moral law. The spirit of the law trumps the letter of the law. See, this is a demonstration of the Semitic way of teaching. They didn't trot out all the variations for people to memorize, because people might think they know it when they don't. They're supposed to apply wisdom that's deduced here to the rest, and then think it through and fill in the blanks themselves, because Semitic learning is earned. One must work for it and be diligent, and then they're rewarded with wisdom and understanding. But now Jesus goes further. Matthew 5:23. He said, "Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go your way first, and be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Agree with your adversary quickly, while you still are in the road to the courthouse with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver you to the judge, and the judge deliver you to the officer, and you be cast into prison. Verily I say to you, thou shalt by no means come out thence till thou hast paid the uttermost farthing." Jesus left us another clue here. That other clue was the fourfold repetition of the word brother in this paragraph. Do you know what those bad old Pharisees were doing? They were bullying their brothers and murdering them with their words, and then they were showing up at the altar with their bright, shiny faces to bring their offerings. "Oh, Lord, if I've done anything wrong, here's my offering." And Jesus called them on it. He said, "You abandon your gift there at the altar, and you reconcile with your brother, the one that you verbally abused." And then he emphasized the urgency of the matter with verses 25 and 26. Now, I got to say this. We got to do a better job of this because of all this political acrimony that's been going on. But it ends tonight. Tonight they count the votes, and we got to live with the results. And the Word says we need to pray for those in power. It doesn't say to wish curses on them. That's improper prayer. We don't have that tool in our toolbox. And it's going to take genuine prayer to heal our nation. And you can't generally pray out of one side of your mouth and squabble with your brothers and sisters out of the other. Ooh. Because you know what? There's been a lot of going on, even here, murdering each other with our words, telling folks they're stupid, ain't worth spit and arguing over stuff. I brought it up last week, but we ain't done. Sorry, we ain't done. We shouldn't even do those things to unbelievers. And we did it to our brothers and sisters in Christ. And people are acting like nothing bad happened, just like the Pharisees did. Well, Jesus told them, you leave your gift at the altar and go reconcile with your brother. Well, I'm telling you the same thing. It's good to settle things with God. But when your sister is hurting because of stuff like this that was said, then both me and the Lord are saying, reconcile with your sister or your brother, whoever it is. All right? And you know what I'm talking about. So Jesus seemed to think that it was important enough to leave your gift at the altar and take care of that. Now, they had to do it face to face. We have other means of communication. I think it's important too. So apologize. Get it done. Talk to each other. Tell each other you love them and mean it. Okay? I don't want to start calling names. So the next category of law here is relationships with others. It's true the Semitic hyperbole is true to form here. The greatest interaction of relations among people is sex. Woo! There are various prohibitions, etc., about sex, but the essence is don't participate in improper sex. All right? Adultery is given as the greatest example. Therefore, in accordance with Semitic thought, if we can conquer our passions as strong as sex, what else can we do with all the other forms of interaction between people? See, this is Jesus' cataloging of the law. Matthew 5, verse 27. You've heard it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say to you, that whosoever looks on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. And if your right eye offend you, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is profitable for you that one of your members should perish, and not your whole body should be cast into hell. And if your right hand offend you, cut it off and cast it from you. For it is profitable for you that one of your members should perish, and not that your whole body should be cast into hell. Now, this is Semitic hyperbole. I mean, are there skeletons in Judea from the 1st century with people's hands cut off? No. This is a figure of speech. It's to emphasize the importance of get or done. All right? The letter of the law is, do not commit adultery. The spirit of the law is, well, if that is so, we ought not even to think it. Why? Because adultery starts out in the lust of an undisciplined mind, and then this concept expands into the eye and the hand. If your eye offend you, if your hand offend you. So it's talking about thinking and actions in general, and not just adultery. See, that's the clue that brings in the rest of this category as an interaction between people from the greatest to the least form. But they all start out in the mind, don't they? So this covers a host of interactions with people that are of lesser nature than sex. But if we can harness the biggie and discipline our minds, we ought to be able to do the same for all the rest of the interactions with people. And you know what? That comprises the whole of civil law. So the first paragraph was the moral law. This paragraph deals with the civil law. The next category of law involves relations with families. The greatest interaction is marriage and divorce. The letter of the law had allowed divorce, but the Pharisees had abused it. And Jesus declared, "It has been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say to you, that whosoever shall put away his wife, save for the cause of fornication, causes her to commit adultery, and whosoever shall marry her that is divorced commits adultery." So marriage is the greatest familial act, and if it is handled properly, all the other familial issues will follow suit. The next category that Jesus put the law into is oaths. Now, this might seem to be a little strange at first, but I believe that this is referring to the ceremonial law. How so? Because when people made sacrifice for their sins at the temple or at the tabernacle, part of that process was their promise to live better. All right? Just like we do at communion. Well, that's an oath, isn't it? So the letter of the law was, do what you have promised. Remember what we just covered when Moses took half the blood from the sacrifice and sprinkled it on the people, and they said, "We will do what God commanded"? Well, that was this kind of an oath. The spirit of the law is, well, that ought to be applicable in all matters. So that's the ceremonial law. Accordingly, Jesus declared, Matthew 5, verse 33, "Again you've heard it's been said by them of old time, thou shalt not forswear yourself, but shalt perform unto the Lord your oaths. But I say to you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king, neither shalt thou swear by the head, because thou canst not make one of your hairs white or black. But let your communication be yes, yes, and no, no. So if you mean yes, say yes, and if you mean no, say no. For whatsoever is more of these comes of evil." So, consequently, the spirit of the law is, since we ought to deliver on what we promised God and not live by a double standard, we ought to do what we promised in everything. Don't just compartmentalize things and behave one way at church and a different way at work. No, behave the same way in every case, the right way, all right? So that's what these "you've heard has been said, but I say to you" statements are. He's giving the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, and at the same time, in keeping with his thought through to the nth degree communication trait, he's giving deeper import at the same time. The general classifications of the law. The fifth category in Jesus' summary of the law is regarding another facet of civil law, crime and punishment. Accidental acts versus intentional ones. This part of civil law is summarized as an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But the spirit of the law takes things further to not let evil pervade at all, because we and God can overcome evil. So he said in verse 38, "You've heard it's been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you that you resist not evil, but whosoever shall touch you," and it should be not smite you on the cheek, but touch you on the right cheek, "turn in the other also." It's not talking about getting beat up. We ought to be able to defend ourselves and our family and our property. We ought to do that. But if you look up the word cheek in a concordance, you'll see that in Isaiah and in 2 Chronicles, it is a way of casting shame. Isaiah chapter 50, verse 6 is one of them. 2 Chronicles 18:22 is another one. So, to touch somebody on the cheek was like giving them the finger. It was designed to provoke, to keep evil going. So when Jesus said, turn to him the other cheek also, it was like saying, I'm not going to let this escalate. It doesn't matter to me. I'm not going to take the bait. All right? There is something more important to me than retaliating. If any man sue you at the law and take away your coat, Jesus said, let him have your cloak also. Well, what's that mean? The common folks at that time didn't carry lots of coin, money with them, and cash did not exist at all. Their economy was agricultural, and so it was largely barter-based. Clothing was an object of value, though, that everyone had, so they would give their coat for bail, for security. So Jesus said, look, if you don't trust me in this law case, I'll show up for trial. Well, take my cloak also. And whosoever shall compel you to go a mile, go with him too. The Roman soldiers would make people carry stuff, just like when Jesus was bearing the cross and couldn't carry it anymore. And so they pointed out, the Romans called Simon of Cyrene. You, come over here. You grab this. You carry it. Same thing. So if a Roman soldier came up to you and said, you carry this, you had to comply. The Romans were in charge. You had to obey. Well, of course, that could become an abusive situation, so they had a rule to cover that, to make for no abuse. They actually had mile markers on their roads. They did. There was a Roman machine that they pulled, a cart that had gears in it, and measured a mile. And so they posted mile markers just like on our interstate highways. So believe it or not, the rule was you can't make somebody carry stuff longer than a mile. So Jesus was teaching how to overcome evil with good. Therefore, if a Roman soldier came up to you and said, you carry this, well, who is in charge? The Roman soldier is. They're the persecutor. They're the abuser. They're the one introducing evil. Well, what if you said, all right, sir, I'll carry it too. Now, who's in control? You are. You've just stopped evil in its tracks. You've introduced good into the situation, and now you have the initiative. That's the first step in overcoming evil with good. Take the initiative in whatever way you can. And that's Semitic hyperbole. If it works in its greatest example, it should work in all else. And that's what these three examples are talking about. So if somebody touches you on the cheek, if they make fun of you, if they say you're stupid, if they say, I don't believe what you say, you're wrong, you're no good, and all the other stuff that people were murdering each other with words for, well, don't participate. Don't take the bait. Don't give them the finger back. Don't let it escalate. We're supposed to overcome evil with good. All right? We're not supposed to be experts with evil. All right? Because who's in charge then? So we want to be in charge with good. So don't give place to it. All right? See? Give to him that asks thee, in verse 42. And from him that would borrow of thee, turn not thou away. So in order to let good overcome evil, good must be in control. And those are examples of how to do that. All right? So the final category here is regarding revenge and war. Now, here we see what Jesus had been aiming toward in this entire dissertation. There is a letter of what the law says, and there is a spirit, the essence behind it in every one of these categories. The Pharisees had abused the law in every category, but the ultimate essence behind all the spirits of the law in all the categories that Jesus gave so far is, this is the essence: love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. This is where Jesus was headed. So the spirit of the law is, if you truly love God and your neighbor, then you will even love your enemies. Verse 43, you've heard it's been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, pray for them that despitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be the children of your Father, which is in heaven, following him. For he makes the sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and he sends rain on the just and on the unjust. Because if you love them that love you, what reward do you have? Don't even the publicans the same? Even the Democrats. And if you salute your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Don't even the publicans so? So if this works in that extreme, it'll work in everything else. And then finally he gets to Matthew 5:48, this great encouragement. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. So that confirms that the law is a reflection of God's holiness and perfection. So here we see in Matthew 5 how Jesus categorized the law of Moses into 6 sections. Isn't that profound? But now comes the next layer. Jesus was going to fulfill the law in all these categories and usher in a new law of the new covenant for spiritual beings, a law of the spirit of life, a law of spiritual life, a law for living spiritual beings, in whom there was no male nor female, bond nor free, Jew nor Gentile. And that all began in whom the Spirit was poured out upon all flesh on the day that the church began, the day of Pentecost. But that wasn't in the resurrection like they thought it would be, because something unexpected happened. On that day in 27 AD, when Jesus delivered his sermon on that first mountain, he expected the kingdom of heaven to come to pass. That's right. Both he and John the Baptist were announcing it. It's imminent, it's coming, it's at hand, it's almost here. But did it come? Did the millennial kingdom that the Jews and the prophets anticipated happen? Did it come to pass? No. The majority of the Jews did not accept him. The Sanhedrin and the priesthood did not accept him. Quite the opposite. They murdered him. And then Jesus was raised. He preached 40 more days, and then he vanished into the clouds. What? And there the apostles were all standing there, gasping, staring up into the sky, and wondering, what? What now? Do you remember the last question they asked Jesus before he ascended? Acts 1:6, remember that? When they therefore were come together, they asked him, saying, Lord, wilt thou at this time restore again the kingdom to Israel? That's what they were expecting. And he said to them, it's not for you to know the times and the seasons which the Father has put in his own power. And then he disappeared. So had the kingdom come? Had it? No. But had the law been fulfilled? Yes. Because something special happened on the day of Pentecost 10 days later. Peter told him about that when he spoke straight, inspired utterance in that sermon on the day of Pentecost. The Spirit had been poured out on all flesh. Was there any distinction between male and female on that day when the Spirit was poured out? Well, what was the spiritual implication of that? Might that affect the law about male and female? How much did it affect them then? Had Jesus fulfilled something? Sure. Was there any distinction between bond or free? Or, as Peter mentioned on that day, men servants and maid servants? Well, how much did that affect the civil law? Jesus had fulfilled something, didn't he? Was there a change in the law reflected by the fact that mongrel languages of the Gentiles were used to miraculously declare the wonderful works of God? And of all places, the temple? Well, what were the implications of that? Jesus had fulfilled something. What was actually implied by the tongues of fire revealed to the apostles? Do you remember what the inauguration was like at the start of the temple and the tabernacle? Same thing. God lit the fire just like he did for Elijah. Why? Because the sacrifice was accepted. Therefore, what sacrifice was accepted on the day of Pentecost? The life and death of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who was our substitute. Therefore, when he died, we died with him. When he arose, we arose with him. When he ascended, we ascended with him. And when he lived the law, we lived the law with him. Why? Because he fulfilled it. But how? The resurrections had not yet occurred. Something unforeseen had happened. Wow. Now, if some of you out there are wondering about all this, there's one thing that you need to understand, and that is the great mystery. And if you don't understand the great mystery, I don't blame you, because it was hidden. It was a mystery. It was not revealed in the Old Testament, because had the devil known it, he would not have crucified Jesus. That's what 1 Corinthians 2 says. And now the devil hates the mystery so much that he's done his best to bury it. And now, for the most part, Orthodox Christianity is ignorant of it. Why? Because as 1 Corinthians 2 declares, it's the second half of Christianity. I explained this in the Marvelous Mystery Tour class. I showed how some monk even monkeyed with the text in 1 Corinthians 2 to cover it up, change the word mysterion, mystery, into marturion, testimony. And I showed you the Uncial manuscript. I showed where it was changed. That monk was an agent of you-know-who, trying to cover back up things that hurt him the most. The great mystery, and us mature Christians who know it and can act upon it. Let's finish up here in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 1. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 1. And I, brethren, when I came to you, came not with excellency of speech or wisdom, declaring unto you the testimony. No. It is the mystery of God. For I determined not to know anything among you, save Jesus Christ and him crucified. Jesus Christ and him crucified is the first half of Christianity. It's a great foundation, but it's not all there is. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling. And my speech and my preaching was not with enticing words of man's wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, that your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. Howbeit, we speak wisdom among them that are mature, yet not the wisdom of this world, nor of the princes of this world to come to nothing. But we speak the wisdom of God within, or involved in, the mystery, even the hidden wisdom, which God ordained before the world unto our glory, which none of the princes of this world knew. For had they known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But, as it is written, eye hath not seen, nor heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. That's for us. But God hath revealed them unto us by his Spirit. For his Spirit searches all the things, yea, the deep things of God. So what deep things are those? In context. The deep things of the great mystery. And man, oh man, they're so big. They're so huge. They're beyond comprehension. Like Ephesians 3 says, they're unsearchable. And they are, like 1 Corinthians 2 declares, which God ordained before the world unto our glory. So when did all this come to pass? When did the effects of Jesus's fulfilling the law start to come into fruition? On the day of Pentecost, when so much changed and so much was fulfilled, it caused wind. Let's take a break. Bless you.